You have found your way to the website of Granger United Methodist Church and the message that has been developed for today as a part of our sermon series, A Call to Faithfulness. A Call to Faithfulness. And today, this focus is on grow in faithfulness. So we are called to faithfulness and we grow in faithfulness. So I begin with this thought, this quote. We don't have to be perfect, just engaged and committed to aligning values with actions. This is not scripture. This thought about perfection is attributed to someone that I was first introduced to on a TED Talk. She is also an author and a motivational speaker, and I hope she wouldn't be insulted. Brené Brown is the author that is attributed to sharing this quote. I was drawn to Ms. Brown's thoughts regarding perfection while considering some of my own confrontation with my public, visible imperfections. And while considering those in light of the passage that I read from Hebrews that you hopefully listen to before you listen to my thoughts. And in that reading from Hebrews, it is stated in the first part of the first verse of chapter 6. Let us go on out there. Right from the start, perfection is difficult to address, and at least I find my attempts to define perfection always come up short. Which is another way of saying that my definition of perfection is imperfect. I think that is why I also was drawn to the image of a cartoon character that maybe you saw on the website or the Facebook declaring she is perfectly imperfect. That's me. Would you be able to say the same about you? I chose to tackle this elusive goal as a piece in the titled A Call to Faithfulness. I propose in my thoughts along the way this week that growing in faithfulness is about pursuing perfection rather than reaching perfection. Last week, as we thought about the reality of falling short of 100% commitment, it was a prelude to this week as we confront our imperfect pursuit of faithful living. I proposed would-be followers of Christ reopen themselves to God's grace and recommit to works of piety and mercy. If you need a little more detail, if you need a refresher, you can always stop what we're doing right now, go back and listen to on September 13th. Maybe I reflect my maturity level when I reveal this reoccurring image of life's journey, especially my faith journey. In Alice in Wonderland, Alice comes to a fork in the road. And at that fork, she meets the Cheshire Cat. And she inquires of the cat. And she inquires of the Cheshire Cat, "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" To which the cat replies, "That depends a good deal on where you want to go." Do you remember Alice's response? "I don't much care where." I don't much care where I go. There is frequently a temptation to throw our hands in the air while screaming, usually after failing at something or reacting to someone letting us down. No one is perfect. One letting us down. No one is perfect. I interpret this reaction as, forget it. I'm not even going to try anymore. Or at least at times, the scenario would lead me to believe that there is a giving up. Not to give up, and furthermore, the scriptures nudge those who would be faithful followers of the Christ to go on toward perfection. You may remember just a moment ago, I feel totally unqualified to give a definition of perfection, but I'm going to try. What does perfection mean? And the other thing I'm going to try is to describe how we strive after it, how we strive after perfection. Now, I hope my thoughts will aid in answering those questions. So I'm going to do my best. I know right from the beginning it will not be perfect, but I'm going to do my best with my best understanding, of the Scripture and of the pursuit of the Christian faith. So first, be aware that perfection is not so much an ideal, but it's a doctrine. It's a doctrine which is weightier than an ideal, at least, and a very important doctrine at that. So it is key that we understand what it means. If it is that substantial within the United Methodist Church, it's key that we understand what perfection means. And so I'm going to offer this. Perfection means wholeness. Perfection means wholeness. Wholeness, being complete, becoming who God intended us to be. For John Wesley, who we note as the founder of the Methodist movement and what is now the United Methodist Church, for John Wesley, perfection was also called holiness, HOLINESS, or sanctification. Holiness of heart and life meant a life filled with to complete love for God and neighbor. A life filled with grace of God. And so when I reflect on perfection, I understand it as a process working toward perfection. Working toward perfection, working toward holiness, working toward completeness. Now, with that in mind, I strive for perfection with the growing understanding that I will not achieve it. But when I take my first breath in eternity, perfection will be achieved. That is the process, that is the life I strive to live here on earth, that I am moving toward that ultimate goal of perfection. In the meantime, I am called to be committed to maturing and growing in faithfulness. That was one of the strains that the author of Hebrews had, and you can go and read the notes that I put in the sermon notes about about that, the background for that. And so I hope that you will look those over and see the text of which he's writing. So I am called to be committed to maturing and growing in faithfulness, to growing in my understanding of God's acts in Jesus Christ. Especially since I answered a historic question. I better say answered a historic question at my ordination some 30 plus years ago. The question that was posed to me in front of thousands and with the bishop standing before me: are you going on to perfection? It is going on to perfection. It is the second question asked in Wesley's historic questions, and I answered, I am, with the help of God. I have yet to hear one or nope, can't be done. So moving on, just how do we strive after perfection? If you listened again to last week's thoughts along the way, what I'm about to share with you is going to sound familiar because I alluded to it last week. I prefaced this week's message, my thoughts, by raising this concept of John. And so the quest for perfection, the quest for holiness, the quest for completeness includes what John Wesley called works of piety and works of mercy. Works of piety can include, but not limited to, study Scripture, both personal and in a group study. Prayer, both private and public, fasting, the Lord's Supper, communion, public worship, avoiding evil, difference between good and evil, and that was part of what the writer of Hebrews is also discussing. So that's the works of piety. Works of mercy can include using our wealth to help the poor, caring for the sick, tending not only to prisoners, but the physical structures of prisons themselves to make sure that they are humane. It can also include these works of mercy. Education also include these works of mercy. Education, to apply ourselves to become better educated, but also to make that available to the society around us. And also war. War, but avoiding war. Wesley believed war was incompatible with both Christian faith and, as he said, common sense. And so those are the works of mercy and the works of piety. Wesley believed these two works were inseparable. It was not an either or. To live each day, including works of piety and mercy, our faith will mature and we will grow in faithfulness, which, at least in my way of thinking, circles my thoughts back to a statement attributed to Brené Brown. We don't have to be perfect, just engaged and committed to aligning values with actions. Aligning values with actions. I conclude the works of piety and mercy are not solely for our personal benefit or reward at the end of life, but to witness to the community through which we move. The Christ-like values ought to be seen in our actions and our decisions and our very presence among church folk, among our co-workers, among strangers, and yes, even in the presence of our enemies. Our Christ-like values ought to be seen in our Christ-like values ought to be seen in our actions, decisions, and very presence. I alluded earlier that a sign of moving toward perfection or maturing in faith is the ability to I find that to be rather easy. Some days, but not always. Not always. When I journey through some gray areas of life, I confess it's not so easy to distinguish good from evil. I'm aware of some actions, decisions that did not lead me toward perfection. Like holding a grudge, speaking ill behind someone's back, ignoring a visible need of another, that is, letting them fend for themselves, lead me toward perfection, nor did they honor Christ. And saying that in this public forum, I also say, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. How could I not draw a comparison to this time of campaigning in our own country? Is it possible the times we've on any number of candidates, not just this year, on any number of issues that we face, on any number of taxes, is it possible the times we vote reveal our political loyalties or our own pocketbook issues without considering what I would call the biblical mandates to care for the poor, or the issues of systemic injustice? Some question whether Jesus should accompany us into the voting booth. I, for one, believe to abide with Jesus while voting is what it trust in God, is what it means to align our actions, our values, with our beliefs. Little did I know the challenges I would confront when I answered that ordination question 30 plus years ago. Are you going on to perfection? I am grateful God brought those into my life. Ordinary folk, bishops, other clergy, faithful, mature laity who model and modeled a mature faith, a growing faith, and encouraged me along to go forward, to not stop where I was, and certainly not to give up. I hope you are aware of those God sends into your life, and I hope that they are doing the same thing that others did for me to help me and encourage me along the way. I hope you are aware you can be that support and encouragement and affection. We are affirming pursuit of perfection as we live out our baptismal vows and our membership vows into a specific denomination and maybe even a specific congregation. We are striving toward perfection when we align Christ-like values with our actions. We are moving on toward perfection when our maturing faith is integrated not only with the one we call Lord, but also with our neighbors. If we want to make a difference in our relationships, in our own home, in our community, in our country, and in our world, it is possible when we take need to grow in faith, intentionally maturing as followers of Christ, pushing ourselves so we never become complacent, so we never come to that point where we declare, I know it all. I don't want to leave you hanging, though. Nope, don't want to leave you hanging. I mentioned the exchange between Alice and the Cheshire cat, who met at the fork in the road. The cat replies to Alice, as I refresh our memories, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. And Alice states matter-of-factly, there. And then the cat replies, then it really doesn't matter. That is to say, which way you go. If it doesn't matter where you want to end up, it doesn't matter which way you go. So as followers of Christ, striving to be faithful to the call of Christ upon our lives, as we strive to be faithful to the one who gave his life, for each of us. Let's know where we are going, because it matters. Let us go on toward perfection. I challenge you to pursue perfection by reflecting on some questions that I've also included in the sermon notes. What steps can we take to move toward perfection? What's at this moment on this day to move toward perfection? What works of piety and mercy come natural for you? What works of piety and mercy pinch you? Piety and mercy pinch you. They just don't come as naturally as others. It might even be uncomfortable. And how can Granger United Methodist Church support you toward perfection? And I'd love for us to share a part of this journey that is called faith. This journey toward perfection. I can't wait to see how God will work in your life, the growth that you will experience. I can't wait to see the joy on your face. I can't wait for you to describe the means of grace, the ways grace is changing your life, and the peace that you experience in your heart. Peace that you experience in your heart. I can't wait to hear from you. So until we meet again, let us go on toward perfection.